This is Rob Morse of the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. I'm reminding you that this podcast is one of the many good ones on the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out the other podcasts at selfdefenseradio.net.
Welcome to Unload and Show Clear, the podcast about all things IDPA. And now, here's your host, living proof that without practice, there's no limit to how little you can accomplish, Lloyd Bailey.
Welcome to another episode of Unload and Show Clear. This is a podcast about the men and women who compete in IDPA, International Defensive Pistol Association. Now, I've been attending IDPA matches since 2011, and over the years, I've met some really amazing people thanks to this sport. Ignore all the colorful jerseys and the sponsor logos, and underneath you're going to find everyday men and women who volunteer their time and their effort and spend their hard-earned dollars on travel, match fees, and gear to make this sport great. And today you're going to meet another one of these awesome people. But first, I want to thank today's sponsor. Before we get started, let me tell you about GlockTriggers.com. Love them or hate them, the one thing you know about Glock pistols is that they are reliable. Out of the box, to the range, absolutely reliable. It's what makes them so popular with competitors, law enforcement, military, and responsible armed citizens. But one of the drawbacks is that stock trigger. Well, Jeff Wilson and the folks at Glock Triggers ask themselves, how do we make them better while maintaining reliability? Using stock parts as their foundation, they've refined the interaction of the metal parts to give you smoother take-up, a cleaner break, and reduced overtravel without sacrificing safety or reliability. Recommended and used by people like Bob Vogel, Travis Haley, and Ken Hackathorn, Glock Triggers custom trigger kits come with a lifetime warranty and a 30-day satisfaction guarantee. Visit them today at glocktriggers.com and check out the Edge, the Vogel, the Skimmer, the Guardian, and the Hackathorn trigger systems. Use the promo code from this podcast, USC20, and save 20% off of your entire order. glocktriggers.com. The highest quality drop-in trigger system for your Glock. Our special guest today is Chuck Lucas from Frederick, Colorado. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little about yourself. Tell us what you do for a living there in Frederick.
Well, currently I am a pharmacist. Many years ago, I was a policeman, and before that, I was military police in the Air Force, which they call security police.
Well, thank you for your service. And you and you were telling me before we got started, you had a I don't know whether you count it as an occupation that probably no one heretofore on the show has ever been involved in.
Well, going back to the 1930s, my dad's side of the family owned a carnival. And when I got out of high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I always wanted to be a policeman, and I wasn't old enough, so I traveled with the carnival for a year before I joined the Air Force.
The next best thing to law enforcement, being a carny.
There you go.
So where did the interest in guns come from? You didn't grow up in Colorado, or you're not originally from Colorado. What?
No, I grew up in northeast Ohio in the Steel Valley, a town called Warren. It's almost dead center between Cleveland and Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we lived in the city, and this is kind of a weird thing too, there was somebody donated land to the city to build a fire department. But the stipulation they put in the clause was that they had to build a gun club in the basement of the fire department.
What?
Yeah. So it was relatively cheap. I mean, it was like, I don't know, $40 a year or something. They had like a 10-lane indoor, just 25-yard pistol range. And my dad was a member, and you could go whenever you wanted. They preferred you not to go in the middle of the night just for the
Right.
noise factor with the firemen sleeping. But we'd go down there, and I was probably 6 years old. We started shooting, and I always liked it. But what really got me hooked, when I was about 12, we were down there, and I had like an FIE 22 revolver that was probably cost about $80. And one of my dad's friends was down there, and my dad was like, "Oh, Chuck's been practicing a lot. I'm pretty sure he could outshoot you." And this was a guy that had just gotten out of the Army and everything, and he was, "Oh, there's no way that this kid could outshoot me." So my dad told me, he said, "Whatever you do, make sure you don't hit the paper at all." So I went up there with this gun, and I shot it about as fast as, it was single action. I shot it about as fast as you could pull the trigger back. We were shooting for 10 cents a shot. And my dad was 2 lanes over with a 22 rifle with a 3x9 scope on it and just shot the center out of this target. And this guy couldn't believe it. So, of course, my dad, told everybody else in town about it, but never got around to telling this guy till about a year later. And I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. I'm going to stick with this shooting thing. And then, of course, we used to mostly rabbit hunting. In Ohio, deer season's only about a week long, and everybody with a gun is in the woods, and we mostly just rabbit hunted.
Right. Where did the interest in handguns and competitive shooting come from?
I think that started when I was in the Air Force, and then when I got on the police department. I'm an old guy. When I was on Shreveport Police Department, and we were issued Smith & Wesson 686 revolvers. Mm-hmm. So I kind of used to shooting revolvers. And then when I moved to East Texas there, I got to be good friends with Alex Azar. And we used to go shooting a lot. And we kind of found out about this IDPA thing and just decided to give it a shot. So I think I shot one local match, and then my first match was, I want to say that at the time it was the Texas State match, but I don't think it's in the same location anymore. It was somewhere down around Houston. And this would have been about 94 or so.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe 2004.
So you got involved in IDPA when you got here in Texas. Who introduced you to IDPA? Was it Alex, or was it, or how did you hear about it?
Well, the gun club that we belonged at hosted local matches there. It's the East Texas Rifle and Pistol Club that
right.
Lewis Freeman runs. I think he was a guest a few weeks ago.
He was.
And, we were just out there, and we found out they were having a match or something. We knew nothing about it, and we said, "Oh, let's just go see what they do." And back then, it was pretty basic stages. I mean, I remember a moving target coming towards you, but it wasn't all automated like the ones today. It was like a guy pulling a rope on the target was on wheels, and it would come flying towards you, stuff like that. We thought, hey, that's pretty cool. We'll start doing that.
And how long after that before you got serious and actually thought about going out and shooting, like you say, a sanctioned match like Texas State?
Well, it was soon after that there was this Texas State match. Of course, we had no idea what to expect on that either. And we went down there, and I shot horribly, but I won a Glock, so it was a win-win.
There you go.
And then, for years, I work midnight shift. I always have ever since I was 19 years old, and I work 7 days on, 7 days off. So a lot of times, just depending how my schedule falls, I miss the matches. And I probably went 10 years with never shooting a classifier because I was mostly just shooting local matches. And up here, they only had them once a year. And
mm-hmm.
So technically, I'm still a marksman, although shooting-wise, I probably should be a sharpshooter, according to my friends. So we'll see how that goes this year when I get a chance to shoot a little more. I really just started taking it seriously and learning about dry practice and all that kind of thing within the last year, I would say.
So you're now in Frederick, Colorado. What part of the state?
That is about 30 miles due north of Denver,
okay.
And about an hour from Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Gotcha. What's the shooting scene like in that part of the state? I imagine that you have issues with weather quite a bit.
That is part of the problem. Is the last 5 months they shoot the second Saturday of the month, and it's been canceled, I think, 5 months in a row due to, and they don't cancel it just lightly. It's got to be pretty bad weather. Recently, within the last year, there's a 5280 Armory started doing indoor matches on the, I believe it's the third Sunday of the month, and I started doing that. And they can only set up 2 stages at a time, so we shoot 2 stages, tear it down, set up 2 more stages, and it's as fun as indoor matches can be.
Right.
Then there's a Bristlecone Shooting Center does bowling pin matches on Monday nights year round, and I've been doing that with my son. That's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as IDPA, there's really about 3 or 4 clubs. If I can go about an hour in any direction, and there's something. There's nothing right exactly where I'm at, but an hour's not a bad trip. There's one club down around Colorado Springs, and then the original one that I shoot with was Clear Creek County, which has been around a long time. I think it's the sister club to Collin County, and it was started, I don't even remember the year. I want to say it was a long time ago. I think Michael Bain was one of the founding members.
Right. I believe it's Front Range IDPA. It's one of the oldest clubs in the country, and it was, I believe, founded, if I recall from what I looked at on the website, March of '98.
I think that's correct.
About a month before Collin County was founded.
Which is a long time in IDPA standards. And then I've been shooting a little bit of USPSA. I have not done an outdoor match yet. I'm mainly doing that just because sometimes those matches are opposite of the IDPA. So if it's my weekend off, then it's something I can do. I still like IDPA better though.
What division? What gun are you competing with most often currently?
Mostly a Glock 34. Some people say I have a Glock problem, but in reality, I have a lot of different guns. I have a problem, but it's not necessarily limited to Glocks. I'm just SSP.
If you couldn't shoot SSP with the Glock 34, what would you switch to?
Well, I'm probably going to try some revolver out next, just because I haven't shot that in a long time. I have some 1911s, and I like them as much as anybody, and CDP would be good, but I think if my next stop's going to be revolver.
Gotcha. Talk about some of your recent activities in terms of sanctioned matches. What anything that you've done recently that you could share a story about, or?
Well, let's see. I did the inaugural New Mexico Blue Line match. That was pretty cool, even though it was kind of a chilly day. And I shot the inaugural Colorado match out there that Walt put on. That was an amazing match, but I think they learned a few things. And this year they're splitting it up into 2 days because it was a long day. And it was a little warm, so I think they moved it a little bit later this year. But and they're putting on 2 matches a year now. They're doing one Memorial Day weekend and one Labor Day weekend. If anybody has a chance to go to that, you will not be disappointed. That range is probably one of the best ranges I've ever been to, and it's only been open less than a year. I don't even remember how many bays they have, but it's in the neighborhood of 20, I think. As far as stories go, I won't call out any of my friends by name, but one of my Glock 34s I acquired from a friend. Now I'm not a big change 29 things on the gun. I think it's fine the way it is. And I have, one that has an upgraded trigger, and maybe I'm just not a good enough shot, but I don't really have a problem with the standard Glock trigger.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy put the sights on, I guess. And anyway, long story short, I'm shooting a stage at Colorado, and I about the 3rd shot into this stage, the front sight just flies off the gun. And it was not the standard cheap Glock sight. I mean, it was a good quality sight. I don't know if it was an installation issue or what. So I tried to shoot it without the sight, and that didn't go well either. So
those little bumpy things on the slide are kind of important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's play a little. I mentioned earlier before we got started that I had some new questions that I wanted to ask you that you wouldn't have been prepared for. I felt like the guests were becoming a little complacent and knew what to expect. And several had told me that they'd listened and they were prepared, and it's like maybe I need to switch things up. So got a little segment that I like to call "Pick Your Poison." So I'm going to give you a couple of options. And you choose one or the other and tell me why.
Okay.
We talked about the weather in Colorado, and so if you had to choose between shooting in the freezing cold or scorching hot, which would you choose? 30 degrees or 100 degrees?
I'd probably go for the 30 degrees. I think, I've done quite a bit of training with Clint Smith, and he always says there is no bad weather, there's only bad clothing. When it's 100, you can't really take the clothing off, so I'd go with the cold.
And there's at some point there's at least one piece of clothing that you absolutely have to wear in IDPA. So yeah,
there you go.
You can only take off so much. If you have to choose between shooting a standard stage, the first stage of a major match, or the last stage, which do you choose?
Maybe it's maybe I inherited this from my friend Gene Simmons, but I kind of like standard stages.
Oh, you're one of those people.
I'm probably better at the standard stages because you don't have to think, and I'm a pretty good marksman. My problem comes in when you have to think about the other things. So really doesn't matter to me. I guess first stage.
Swinging threat targets or swinging non-threat targets, which do you prefer?
I prefer them to just stand still. That's probably my biggest weakness. I'm kind of working on building a swinger right now to practice on. I think swinging non-threats are easier to miss because I just pretend they're a threat and then I miss them.
In my case, if I pretended they were threats, I'd just shoot them.
There you go.
You talked about your marksmanship. Wide open targets at 20 yards or really close targets with lots of non-threats, like say 10 yards?
Probably a wide open target up to maybe 20, 25 yards, which you don't see too often in IDPA.
You have them occasionally, and you're the first person to actually say they trust their marksmanship out to 20, 25 yards better than they trust shooting at really fast, really close with lots of non-threats.
I guess I was lucky that my dad was actually more of a skeet shooter than handgun and rifle. But when I was a young kid, probably somewhere between 8 and 10, I remember he signed me up for some kind of, I don't even remember what it was, but it was some kind of marksmanship class. I think it might have been through the NRA. And then I took that class, and I used to sit in our backyard for hours with a pellet gun. I had like a Crossman that you had to pump up, 22 single shot, and I would probably at about 20 yards, I would stick pencils in the ground and shoot them in half.
Oh, wow.
And then back when you could do such a thing, there was a Woolco. You remember Woolco's stores? Did they have those in the South? It was kind of like Woolworths, but it was a big hardware store, everything store. And right in the middle of the store, they set up a little booth shooting pellet guns. It was like some kind of contest. And I went in there, and it really was the first time I ever shot a rifle, I think, anywhere besides my backyard. And I won a little Crossman pellet gun. So that's kind of how I got hooked on shooting there, just right from the beginning, and had good training on the marksmanship part of it.
This kind of is a related question. Which of these two rules had the biggest effect on how you shoot on your game? The 1 point per second change, or the which kind of stresses the accuracy, shooting for accuracy, or being able to reload out in the open and on the move?
Probably the being able to reload. You still have to be careful not to drop your magazine or anything, but yeah, probably that. I'm fairly fast reloader. I just got to get better at planning the stages. I mean, I just used to get up there and just, go shoot. I never really thought about, well, I should reload here or reload there. But shooting with some of these better shooters has given me some insight into how the game really works as opposed to just the shooting.
Right.
I always like to say it's always just a game unless they're shooting back at you.
Well, talk about you went off after you got back from the Air Force. How did you end up as a police officer on the mean streets of Shreveport?
Well, I was stationed in Shreveport. Like I said, I always wanted to be a policeman. My uncle was a policeman. When I was in high school, I worked at my cousin's restaurant, and we had a Friday and Saturday nights, we had a big band room and everything, and there was always policemen there for security and stuff. And so when I turned 21, it was about time to get out of the Air Force, and Shreveport was hiring at the time. That's where I met my wife, which, let's see, we got married in June of 85, and then I got on the police department in January of 86. And yes, we're still married, believe it or not. But yeah, I worked a bad neighborhood on midnight shift with Tuesdays and Wednesdays off. And I believe I was making right at $18,000 a year back then, which even then was not terrifically good money. And after about 4 years, my wife's sister graduated nursing school and married a guy that graduated pharmacy school. And they were living in a nice house on the good side of town. And I said, maybe that college thing isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I just my wife already had her master's degree, so she worked and I went back to school.
People talk about shooting, competitive shooting as, learning bad habits and it'll get you killed in the streets and all that stuff. Talk about your experience as a law enforcement officer and how it translates into competitive shooting and whether you see IDPA. Some people say, well, this is good training. Other people will say, no, it's just a game. Is it one, the other, or both?
Oh, it's both. I mean, it's definitely both. The only thing I would say is maybe in something like IDPA or definitely USPA, you go a little quicker than you would if you're not sure what's exactly around the corner.
Right.
When I was on Shreveport, it was before they had canine officers, and I had a good friend got killed, and that's what started their canine program, because we used to be the ones that went into the buildings to, if you thought somebody was in there. And, in IDPA, you go around the corner, and the worst that can happen is you miss the target or you shoot a non-threat. It's not quite the same, but it's still, you learn good habits. Even after all these years, I was shooting with somebody last week, and they pointed out that when I was reaching back to draw the gun, I was like rotating my whole upper body, which serves no purpose other than slowing me down probably a second and a half. So, I feel like you're never too old to learn, and it helps to shoot with different eyes watching you too. That's why I like to go to different training classes, not because I'm expecting the apocalypse any day, just because I think it's a good way to learn, and different eyes tell you different things or something you may have never thought about before.
Right. You talked about, in the real world, as a police officer, you go around the corner, you don't know what you're running yourself into. Do you think that a lot of people, were not crazy about the 1 point per second rule? And the rationale for it was, of course, the idea that we're accountable for every shot, and that you've got to be careful with your shot placement instead of just spraying and praying. Do you think that was what were your thoughts about that change? As a former police officer, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think you obviously, like you said, you're responsible for every bullet, so you need to be more accurate. But in the big picture of the game, I don't think it makes a difference one way or the other, because it applies to everybody. Everybody's got the same rules. So being able to run faster shouldn't really be as much a part of the sport as being able to shoot straighter, in my opinion.
Right. Besides the standard stuff that everybody takes to the range, to a match, the holster and mag carriers and all the ammo and stuff, is there anything unusual or interesting that you put in the range bag to go to a match that you absolutely have to take with you, and why?
Well, I usually carry a boar snake just in case you happen to be laying in a mud puddle or something. I usually have like a Leatherman and some tweezers, which I haven't used in years, but I got a splinter on a barricade one time, so there's tweezers in my bag now. I usually carry some extra fiber optic for the front sight just in case. I've never had to use it, and a roll of duct tape just because you should always have duct tape.
You can fix anything with duct tape.
And then I haven't needed it much in Colorado because it's really dry here most of the year when it's not snowing. But in Colorado, I used to always keep in Texas, I used to always keep a shower cap in my bag just a cheap shower cap that you could kind of stretch around the gun if you were in a downpour.
Gotcha.
That's about it. Nothing too exciting.
Well, I hadn't heard of the shower cap, so that's a new one. That's a good that'll work. Any interesting, a memory of a match or a stage, just something weird or funny or unusual that you ran across at a it could be a local match or a sanctioned match, something that just a fun story you can share with us?
Boy, I hate to be boring, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that was super unusual. There was at the Colorado match last year. This didn't happen to me, but it was my squad. They had a couple of old beater cars that they were using for props, and you had to shoot out of the get out of the passenger side or what, I can't remember. But about halfway through the match, the door handle broke off.
Oh.
And of course, they couldn't decide what to do because they had another car, but it wasn't exactly the same, and they wasn't sure if somebody was going to be an idiot and challenge the stage because somebody had 3 inches more room sitting than the previous people. So they rigged it up some kind of way. I don't remember how they fixed it. Actually, I said Colorado, but I think that was the New Mexico one, actually. And we got through it.
All right, so you kind of know what the last question always is as we wrap things up. You've been doing this for a while. I think you said 2004. What is it about IDPA? You also mentioned that you shoot other sports, but what is it about IDPA that you love? Why do you keep shooting it, and why do you keep coming back? What do you love about the sport?
Well, I'm sure this answer is getting boring, but obviously it's mostly the people. The way people help you out. This past year, I think it might have been the Colorado match, was the first time I met Cody and Margot Ray. But I went up and introduced myself and told them that Lewis Freeman told me to say hello, and you'd have thought I was their new best friends, Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen, like you said, somebody's gun breaks and 3 people have a gun ready for them to shoot, or an extra magazine, or whatever it is you need. Somebody's got it for you, and some of the other sports aren't quite that friendly, to put it mildly. I started in the South, and you're not going to find nicer people than you'll find in East Texas. I hope to get back down there one day.
Well, Chuck, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for your service to our country, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be a guest today, and I look forward to the opportunity. Hope you make it back to East Texas and we get to shoot together or run across each other on the range down the road.
Yeah, I'd like that, and thank you for what you do, and especially this podcast and just the things you do for the gun community in general. But I think I've really, names that I've heard before that I didn't really know, and I've just learned some very interesting things about people by listening to your show here.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our guest for coming on the show and our sponsors for making all of this possible. take a moment, if you would, to check out the website, check out our show notes at unloadpodcast.com. We've got lots of interviews with more amazing guests like the one you heard today. Join our Facebook group at unloadpodcast.com/Facebook for all the latest updates and to connect with other fans of the show. And if you'd like to support the show, we sure would appreciate it. Consider becoming a patron at unloadpodcast.com/extra. I've got some full-length interviews and special content available there exclusively for patrons as well. And if you know somebody or you yourself would make an interesting guest for a future episode of Unload and Show Clear, please contact me at lloyd@unloadpodcast.com or click on the contact page on the website and send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Tune in again next time for another episode of Unload and Show Clear.